Hello everyone, happy Tuesday. It's easier to do when I do it on the same day every week, right? I'm here today because I want to talk about this lovely magazine that I found at Shoppers Drug Mart. And it's a special edition because they don't typically write about the psychology behind animals, but this time they did. And I read through it cautiously and I wanted to tell you a little bit about it. They go through several different categories talking about whether they're technically considered people in the sense that they have thoughts and feelings and things like that, how their interaction in their communities work, hierarchies, things like that, if they have what are called friends in our world, if they can mourn, how they communicate, can animals have mental illnesses, things like that, what rights do they have, and how our species perceives different types of animals. So it might be a little bit longer today, but I'm going to try and talk quicker so that it doesn't take so long. Okay, so the first is, yes, we know they have brains, but do they have minds? Independent thoughts that make them unique human beings, or beings in general. One problem is that they have lots of communication, and it might not specifically be verbal communication. It could be, the whirring of the wings, the tilt of their body, a lot of nonverbal cues, but we just don't understand them, so we assume that they're not communicating at all. So, for example, there's the ape Kanzi that learned sign language, and we people taught him to sign certain things that he wanted, and the scientist went to meet him for this article, and he found that he could put together new sentences. So instead of saying let's go outside, he said let's get this and then go outside. So he was able to come up with what he wanted to do and where he wanted to do it, which is quite a bit for sign language considering they're one of our closest relatives. Animals definitely have emotion. They've been brain scanned while they're feeling certain things, and it has been found that the similar areas that light up in our brain when, say, we're feeling sad or angry also show up in them. And I don't know how exactly they got them to elicit the emotion. It could be they played soundtracks of animals making specific sounds to elicit that emotion, but that's what they found. Only advanced minds can use tools for manipulation, and create tools, first of all, and actually use them. And I actually did a presentation on this in my third year of university. We each got to pick one topic and present it. And my friend Amy and I did tool use, and a lot of the animals had no idea what to do. Usually it's the more advanced ones, but what was interesting was that birds, which don't have a particularly large frontal cortex, which is where the area of this part of the brain functions to help the chimps use tools. For example, when they take sticks and break them, poke them into ant hills, and they pull out all the ants. That's tool manipulation. But they also found that crows could do the same thing when given the right supplies. So they gave them a short stick and a long stick, and most of them tried the short stick first because in the previous exercise they only had to use the short one. But in this one they had to use the long one, and in some they had to shape it to a point so they could pick something up. But they did surprisingly well. There's also another one where they put a chimp in a room and hung a banana from the ceiling, and had a stack of boxes in the corner. So the chimp had to go and stack some boxes so he could climb up and reach the banana, I would love to see the tapes for that because that would be exceptionally interesting. They can also plan for the future. So for example, when hyenas go out hunting, depending on how much food they need, they'll either take a smaller group or a larger group, and they know that if they want to catch a bigger prey, that they need a bigger group, because if their pack needs more food, then they'll take more so that they can cut off the bigger prey and catch them that way. And they can self-correct, which is really interesting. So if they find that their plan isn't working, they can communicate within their group to solve the problem rather than just start over hunting a new animal, which is really interesting. The theory is that the bigger the cerebral cortex, the higher the intelligence of the animal. However, some species judge it by whether the animal has theory of mind. And this is a very human theory. And basically it means that all knowledge is not universal knowledge. So in humans, they do this experiment where someone comes into a room and tells a child that something is hidden in a toy chest in the side of the room. The participant in the study then leaves the room and a parent comes in. And the kid asks for the toy, assuming that the parent knows where it is, even though they weren't in the room when they were told where it is. So it takes a certain age for children to realize that not everything that they know, other people know. Which takes a bit, but they tested this for animals. I'm not quite sure if I remember what they said, but I know when they tested it on apes, for example, somebody came in and hid bananas somewhere, that the first ape couldn't get it and they needed help from another one. But when the other ape came in, they just kept, it was either they kept just signaling banana or food, and the other one didn't get it, or they smelt it out together. But either way, I don't think they have theory of mind, but I'm not entirely sure on that one. I read the magazine about a month and a half ago, so we'll see. This is also relative to the ethics of animal testing, because scientists are more likely to test on animals that they believe they don't have higher intelligence. So the more human they are, meaning the more intelligence they have, the closer to apes, and the more intellectual their activities and communications, the more ethical the studies on that species have to be to pass safety. So that's the first part. But there's a big, big difference between having a brain and having a conscious mind. Of course, all animals have conscious and unconscious. I'm just assuming here. But it makes sense to me that they do. The next part is pack life. A lot of times they communicate in order to keep their hierarchy in balance. So in some cases, the females are in charge and they mate with whatever males they want. And in the case of lions, one male is in charge, and if a new male comes in and defeats that male, the first male and anyone who comes with him kills all the babies in that pack because they're from the other male. So they kill them to restart the females back into estrus so that he can breed and replace all of the males with his own genes. Which is a little ridiculous, but that's how it is in the wild. Bigger packs mean they need more food, but they have more hunting potential. So a lot of it is cost versus benefit, which goes back to what I was saying about planning for the future. So if they know that, for example, it's getting wetter out and winter's coming, they're probably not going to expand their pack knowing that the food is going to become scarce and can't support as many species. We already talked kind of about reproduction, but hyenas are the ones that are all female, meaning the females lead the pack, which is quite uncommon in animal species. It's typically a male or a group of males, but in hyenas' case it is females. So friendship. In the wild, it's all about give and take. So for example, if one day you're really hungry and your chimpanzee friend brings you a banana, you aren't immediately going to give something back to him, because in a lot of cases you can't. So they wait around and eventually, when the first ape needs something, the one who he helped will bring him something. What's interesting is that they studied this over several years and found that it doesn't matter how long is between. The give and take, the unevenness is what keeps the friendship going, because someone always owes someone. but they also use this as their friends as wingmen. In the case of dolphins, they use them to make their mating dance more elaborate, which I found is really interesting. But in this case, the give and take is for mates. So once the first dolphin finds a mate, then he will help his friend find a mate as well, which increases both of their offspring chances and a lot of it for the wild for reproductionist statistics. So you have to keep an eye out for that. They also found that it decreased stress the stronger the friendship bonds that the animals had. So again, this makes sense because in humans, the more close friends we have, the less stressed out we are because we know we have someone to support us all the time. Long-term friendships are more common when the animals meet when they're young. There was an example of a baby hippo that was found in a tortoise, and the baby would nudge the tortoise when he wanted to go for a walk, and they would walk together, and the hippo grew up with the tortoise, which is really amazing. Friendships are so significant in the wild that there's a gene for helping other animals, the altruistic gene, and it's passed down because being friendly and having friends is so important to survival that there's a characteristic that got passed forward. Meaning you want this trait because you're going to be more successful as a human, as a being, if you have this trait. Okay, the next chapter is mourning. We find that the cuter the animal, the higher probability we will have emotions to seeing that animal or reacting if something bad happens. So for a lot of people, if a bunch of puppies were run over, that would be very sad. And I know my chest feels weird when I say that. But if it was a bag of mice, people would be less upset about it. It wouldn't be a huge deal. So that's something really interesting because a lot of it is our perception on whether or not they can exhibit emotions. So for example, if spiders had a certain communication that meant that they were sad, we would be less likely to consider it an emotion than we would if it was, a penguin or a koala or something like that. Again, there's different interpretations of their communication. A lot of it is in the frontal cortex, and if the frontal cortex is small, there's a higher probability that that animal can exhibit emotions that we can interpret, which is really interesting. For mourning, if there is less support when an animal in their group dies, the stress in that group will be much higher. So if they don't properly mourn, there will be more stress, more corticosteroids in the animal's blood. And this is seen with army dogs when their handlers and the soldiers don't come back. And when they go to the funeral and they mourn by the casket, they just sit there and either cry or just whimper or sit and stare at it. A lot of times with animals, they exhibit what's called denial, where, especially in apes, they find this, where the mothers will carry dead babies around because they can't admit that the baby's dead. So they'll even fake nurse the baby just because they can't admit to themselves that the baby died. So a lot of that not mimics in human nature, but it's very similar. Okay. Now, communication a lot of times between animals is a lot more complex than we think it is. So, for example, there's the honeybee dance where they dance in certain patterns to tell other members, especially the worker bees, where the honey is. So or where the good flowers are, and they go out to the flowers based on where the dancers tell them to go. There's also the story about Clever Hans, the horse that learned to count, but was really noticing his owner's body position, and he would tense up when he got close to the number and relax when he got it right. There's another theory that dolphins actually have names. And there's a certain combination of clicks and sounds that they make, and they keep that name throughout their life, which is really interesting. For mental illness, a lot of this study has been done on caged animals. So, for example, orcas, zoo animals, things like that. There's actually an orca in Florida that killed 3 of its trainers because normally it was very friendly, but he started getting, for lack of a better word, feeling caged in, like he had no control over his life. So he grabbed the braid of his trainer and dragged her underwater. But a lot of it is because people think of them as ways to make money rather than beings that actually have feelings. And if they did, things like zoos wouldn't exist. There's also puppy mills. So all of the dogs that come from places like that have a much higher probability of exhibiting behavioral issues because they are caged during that key behavioral setting area. So a lot of their socialization and things like that get completely passed over because they don't have positive things in their environment to influence positive behaviors and emotions and things like that. A lot of us is misinterpreting how they feel. So if there's an animal that paces back and forth, this doesn't necessarily mean they have a mental illness. It could mean that they're nervous, that their stomach is upset and they're trying to get it to move. But a lot of times, most people don't even consider them having emotions. They say it would be depression-like symptoms. They wouldn't actually say that the animal has depression, but even if they exhibit all the same symptoms that humans do, when we classify it as depression, it's only depression-like. In the limbic system is where we exhibit a lot of our emotions. And this is the same in every single mammal on the planet. The area of the brain for the limbic system. So if we can have mental illness, then I don't see why they can't. Or we can't classify their behavior as mental illness. So what they're doing now in zoos is enriching their environment, meaning making them work for their food and giving it to them in a more raw way, or improving the environment so it's not all concrete, adding a little grass or dirt or covering the walls with something to make it less cell-like, basically. Animal rights. In the case of elephants used for rides in Africa and zoos and things like that, they're beaten into submission. A lot of times they're tied to trees and beaten, and if they refuse to work, they're starved. Okay, hopefully that worked, or we're going to have to see. And if they don't comply to what they're being asked to do, they're starved. So in their cases of survival, it's easier for them to work and submit to whippings rather than not eat at all. A lot of times they're seen as submissive to humans just because they have no defense. And if they do rise up and try to communicate to the people that they don't like what's happening to them, then they're seen as vicious and they're either tranquilized or put down. But things about animal rights require a really big outrage for people to care enough to do something about it and protest and petition and things like that. But the meat industry started to protest because people would go in and film their factories, and they were so disgusting that the meat industry actually filed a petition that people can't film in there because they don't want people seeing how they treat their animals. So now you're not allowed to film in factory farms for that reason. But because of a lot of the petitions, the animals have to have a higher quality of life in the factory, but that really just means they're, 10 in the cage instead of 15, and they still don't get to feel actual grass under their feet quite a lot. In terms of our species perception of animals, people prefer dogs. They are the most popular pet on the planet, and I know that cats are more popular in the United States, but overall in the world, people prefer dogs. The pet industry is the $67 billion industry, which has gone up 39% between 2010 and 2016. If the animals are unrelatable to us, meaning, animals that don't have arms, fish, things like that, there's less compassion in us for them. So this is the same thing I was talking about. If a bag of puppies got run over in a bag of rats, people would care less about the rats. At the pictures of different animals, elicits different reactions from different parts of our brain. So happiness lights up when we see, kittens, but if we see a snake, the fear centers light up. So it's a completely different inbred response for us, because most people don't need to be told that snakes are dangerous. Most people just know, and they say, I've never seen a snake, but I was told that they're dangerous, so I'm going to be afraid when I see them. But a lot of times it's a, garter snake or something that can't do anything. During a lot of natural disasters, people refused to leave their houses, which resulted in the Pet Evacuation and Transportation Act, meaning there's a rescue group that comes during the disaster to try and save some of the pets, and then they're taken to a local shelter where people can try and come and get them after. A lot of times they aren't found, but sometimes they are. So that's exciting. But that's everything I read in here. If you have any questions about it, feel free to message me. But I hope that whole video went through. It cut out near the end, and I'm hoping I don't have to do it again, but we'll see. Have a fantastic Tuesday and rest of your week, and I will see you next week for our first February live video.